Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son, Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Hi, Dad. Thanks for having me on the show again. I want to lead into the pulling the strings idea and get into talking about who's behind the scenes and why, or start digging a little deeper there. But I want to start with an article that I just found from, appears to be a couple of days ago, titled Russia and Israel's Middle East Dance by Daniel Wagner, CEO of Country Risk Solutions, co-author of the book Global Risk, Agility, and Decision Making. I don't know who's even, it's a Huffington Post, the World Post, from a couple of days ago. It says Russia and Israel have a long history of diplomatic and military collaboration in the Middle East, dating back to the Arab-Israeli War of 1948, when Israel's triumph over its neighbors was largely attributable to Moscow's military support. Following the Arab-Israeli War of 1967, Israel established itself as a key U.S. ally as the Soviet Union partnered with a host of Arab nations, most importantly, Syria. Yet despite their history of having been on opposite sides for much of the Cold War, since the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian Federation has pursued an increasingly pragmatic foreign policy with Israel. Now, from everything we've studied, Dad, just in that first paragraph, it sort of blew me off my seat, and the things I've been learning most recently, confirming, I suppose, some of the things we had talked about before with the whole Bolshevik Revolution and the founding of the Soviet Union of Russia goes back to this much deeper plan that was funded, and it was all Jews that turn out to be the ones that were funded to go do it. Marx and Lenin and Trotsky and all Jews. And something I just saw recently pointed out that when they signed the official documentation for the Republic, the official declaration, I suppose, it was, they showed a photo of all the declaration signers and all Jews. And we talked about this before. Apparently 75% of all the decision makers in the post-Bolshevik Revolution Soviet Republic, the early Soviet Republic, were all Jews. And it's so funny to say it that way, as if it means something. I see how it's another way of dividing the people, divide and conquer. Chaos, creating chaos, blaming the Jews for everything. Because, of course, the Jews as a people, as a belief system, like saying the Christians, the Jews as a self-acknowledged organization of people who, follow the Jewish monotheistic faith. Of course, not all Jews, or some very small portion are involved in whatever nefarious or clandestine activities. Secret societies are secret for a reason. And don't forget, Christianity was once one of the most secret societies in the world, in that world. So I'm just pointing out that it's not, if you can see in this paragraph, as I do, Dad, the setup in it all in these last 100 years, let's say, that I'm always pointing to as the critical, the critical historical evidence of what's really going on and why, and that it's coming about now. These buildup of weapons is, to me, the indication that it's coming soon. I don't know, soon as in a few years, a dozen years, 20 years. I mean, that's all pretty soon when you look at how long it's been building. This new world order of breaking free from the monarchs and setting up America, and then having to fight to get all of their fraternal organizations, the initiated ones, the ones that were willing to carry on the plan, into the positions. Because I keep confronting, it's either that or that's all a big smokescreen. But when I imagine, Dad, that that's all a big smokescreen, I keep coming back to the things that show up as the real evidences of history, right down to, say, the Star of David. Why is that long before it was the Star of David, the pentagram had this dark magic power to the people that practiced it that way, and why was that chosen as the Star of David? And Solomon, who, if you know the scriptures, I thought it was really fun to see them this week by some old production that quoted the scriptures that showed how Solomon had gone astray and built all these temples to his many wives in the end. He had so many wives, and he was warned, apparently, in the beginning, by taking these wives from different cultures, they're going to bend your heart and you'll follow these different gods. And it claims, whether this is all legend or not, this is Christian, this is the scripture that we all want to pretend points us in the direction of the truth. And it says that, Solomon, for love, he fell in love with these different wives from different places, and he built Ashtoreth poles, and he built all sorts of Molech. Can you imagine? Solomon built gods to Molech? Well, look it up. It's in your scripture. All right. It's not what I'm doing this week. We'll do that in the Bible study, but I'm trying for myself to establish how much of this foolishness that we hear about, Satan worship and all this kind of stuff, I don't buy it. It's on the lips of too many people. It's too common knowledge for secret societies in which you don't even, only recently have any of this come out through the media to the public, through their controlled media in their controlled manner. And it all seems to be hand in hand with this new world. For them, enlightenment is the reality. And Nietzsche is the hero, and Nietzsche hasn't got any God, not even a dark God. So I keep going back and forth between wondering if the people who follow some religious Luciferianism are hiring the materialists, the wealthy materialists, with their vision of Nietzsche, to do the dirty work. Or if it's the other way around, that the Nietzscheite materialist bankers have all the power and they create this Luciferian image, Illuminati and Satanism and all these different things that they keep creating as fast as they can and need to keep the masses chasing something. What are the jets jettison when they got a missile on their tail? We're shown in our movies, countermeasures, or the submarines, right? Or the boats, when the missile's coming, you launch countermeasures. And so, I'm beginning to see a lot of this as the countermeasures. And what is and what isn't. And that, to me, is the real study and why it's impossible to put our finger on. Because truth always leaves crumbs behind evidence. And people who are really in charge, they leave their evidence. They leave their mark on history. even when they do things in secret, they build edifices to themselves. They leave coded writings and all sorts of things to continue their knowledge and continue their understanding, make sure everyone knows that it exists and it was them who preserved it and such. That's a natural. I can understand all that. And that's what brings me back to this other side where we've got a world full of symbols that appear to be important even to important people, and those seem to come more from their fraternal organizations, their secret societies. They belong to these societies, and those are very secretive. They don't get talked about very much. All my life, I'm looking at what gets talked about a lot. Luciferianism and, all this stuff gets pointed to a lot. Satan worship and Antichrist and all this kind of stuff. But the rebuilding of Solomon's temple by the Masons, I never hear that connected in journalism with the fact that what's at stake right now. These people have a temple institute and want to rebuild the temple, and the connection of the Masons, say, of America and the world with Hiram Abiff, the builder of Solomon's temple, and that whole deep connection that runs through their organizations, and how it is that it's all the highest members of these organizations that wind up presidents, or enough of them to be, when you look at how many few presidents there's ever been in the history of the world, the United States, and to think of the percentage of them that are associated and high-ranking Masons, as it were, or other secret societies. A lot of them hold multiple memberships of these societies that take initiation, and they're surrounded with all these symbols, that seem important to these important people who find themselves the superior people, the enlightened people, and all this kind of crud. And so, I think you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's all, there's a reason that there's an intertwining of the real and the fake. And the reason is because the real story and the fake story are so very close. As we read in this last Bible study, we started with the beginning of Genesis, where it accuses the serpent of being through subtlety, the subtle one, using subtlety to deceive Eve, by first misrepresenting the question or the situation. So God said, you can't eat any of the fruit, huh? And she said, no, we can eat all of the fruit, just not this one. Oh, that one. Well, that's because, right? And so that's the legend of all this. And I find that so interesting because what I'm studying now comes down to learning that this modern truth that so many keep pointing to as central to their deeper understanding, whether it's the mysticism of it or the philosophy of it, the metaphysics of it. I keep coming back to this Kabala, I think is how they pronounce it. This Kabbalah, and we've been talking about it. This seems to be where, and yet, I saw something this past week designed obviously for the profane, to introduce them to the teachings of Kabbalah. Very professional, very simple, like you're teaching elementary school students how to read and write. Here's what it really is about. And again, just like the Satanists have their deeper application to the scriptures that we Christians call our scriptures, it's like I say, that it's not ours and theirs, it's their interpretation of the same scripture. And they have this deep metaphysical interpretation, and it seems to, everything is the point, seems to come from this Kabbalistic interpretation because it's a metaphysical one that presents man. And you see how the Hindu understanding either comes from it or influenced it. The dualistic understanding either comes from it or influences it. The pantheistic understanding either comes from it or influences it. And the only thing it truly seems to stand against, in the way it was presented to me in this very intelligent, simple manner, and much better than anything I'm able to present, much more lucid. This person was able to have a camera overhead over a whiteboard that he could draw his images, just like I've done in my Metaphysics of Love, but I can't show them to anybody to illustrate. He draws his illustration as he's talking and points out that the infinite, the creator, he goes as far as to call what we call God the creator, but never actually says God. I listened to about 3 hours of this guy, because he's got 20 hours of teaching, and I thought after the first 3 hours I was getting a handle on this introduction to the metaphysic of it. And the idea is that the creator God, in the Hindu sense of to reveal himself, itself, in the act of creation, is split off, and this all comes now from the Kabbalah. This isn't this man's teaching, this is this man teaching the Kabbalah, which he starts by pointing out is something that's hidden for a reason, because the way it was written in code. It wasn't written to say what people think it says. It was something that only the initiated could understand, the priesthood of the Kabbalah. And that in 1995, they opened up the Kabbalah to the profane, but they wrote some books about how it's to be taught to the profane to bring them into it, since the hidden knowledge can't just be shown. And that's what he's teaching from. He says he talks about all this right up front. So I'm being shown like a child. Here's what Kabbalah means. And so all of the mysticism was taken out. In fact, he denies that what Kabbalah is Illuminati and mysticism and child sacrifice and all this. He distances himself in order to give you the basic, this is what the Kabbalah means, and what it is a metaphysical way of looking at life. The way I've tried to present in the Metaphysics of Love, only love isn't what comes out of this, but a process of sort of degradation into this world, and then reintegration, as it were, back into the, what did he call it? The wholeness, the oneness, the way they like to call it, this pantheistic vision of humanity. In the beginning, sort of presenting our human attachment to ourself as being ego and illusion, for the most part, in this world, and yet somehow feeling that we're then motivated to want to elevate ourselves to the point of being in this oneness. It's like where I see the Buddha ideas come from. There's no God. For Buddha, for the Hindus, this is all a process of God showing itself, himself, ultimate reality being revealed in the expression of human consciousness. But that human consciousness is veiled in an illusion of thinking we are ourselves and burdened by this ego, because as the Kabbalah explains it, if I understand it right, that is the other side of God's nature, the Creator's nature, to bestow, and the creature's nature to receive. And because of that, that's where the ego comes from, is the opposite. And so all of it mirrors very much what I have found. Not mirrors, but of course this is what everyone talks about now, is the anticipation of everyone's knowledge, this Kabbalah, and I see why. Funny enough, I feel quite confirmed, Dad, that this is what I came to all by myself from rejecting Christian metaphysics as I beheld it being taught to me through Christian rendition of Scripture, and finding some metaphysic that could reconcile a God as beheld, as separate from us in Christian scripture, and a reason for consciousness to exist apart from God and be its own, with its own reward, be in fact created from the dust, not a spirit that descends into a body, but a body that's created first, as Paul said, from the dust, meaning like an ape, let's say, or any other creature that's evolved from the material of time and space, and then the life of God breathed into it, and that's when the soul is created, not before. Now, you could, for me, I argue, well, does that not simply refer to God, transposing a soul into this body that exists, at least within himself, which doesn't necessarily separate you completely from some pantheistic view. But on the idea of God sort of breathing new life into each one of these little mud creatures, these little mud men, as Scott used to call them, there is something quite creative in that, isn't there? There never was a soul, and that gives you an idea of this threat of the God that can take back that soul and return you to just the dust that you were brought from, just the mud, rather than you being a soul that already existed. And therefore, when your body dies, it's the soul goes somewhere, because it's, so all of that to me is very interesting, because otherwise, what's this about Hades, so well established in Enoch and Greek understanding and Jewish understanding, Sheol? The whole thing is quite clearly a place of abode for the souls, the people that don't have bodies. So are these new people that are made from the mud and breathed life? They have a soul. And now when they die, that soul goes somewhere until it's judged worthy of getting a body back or being extinguished. That's pretty heavy for me. All I know is the whole thing for me on a metaphysical level is pinned on this God of love. Otherwise, there's no reason, infinity doesn't work in time and space. The only way this whole cosmic universe is in an infinite medium is if it's in the mind of someone, something, some God. And so as an idea in the mind of God, it is all infinite. And if that idea is to create things that are in themselves infinite as the reconciliation of that idea, and that's what I believe human beings are, and that the torment day and night is the symbol of that constant recognition of everything that's not love, which is what we are. I mean, even by this Kabbalistic knowledge, we are that representation of to receive rather than to bestow. They almost go as far as love, and I think he uses the word love a couple times in the whole presentation, but it's not presented that way. It's presented on us losing the knowledge of the Creator, which is to bestow, and that we need to return to that. I saw, as I watched more and more, the deeper indoctrination into the fact of being told what to bestow all of your illusionary life on, because they also teach that everything is in this ego illusion of yours. And see, that's where I say how close the stories are, and they part company. Because if that's true, let me tell you, it's a pretty negative metaphysic beyond that. Either you have no real freedom, because if everything is an illusion, then of course not only is your freedom an illusion, but the idea of what you think you are. If that's an illusion, what's your freedom? To do what? To keep pursuing the illusion? Like someone who thinks they can fly, and so the closer they get to the cliff, the better? That metaphysic is a naturally destructive one. And this always, Dad, keeps taking me back to this. They claim this Kabala is of divine inspiration, the knowledge The knowledge of good and evil, the knowledge of this. Interestingly enough, Dad, when you know my metaphysical interpretation of sort of 6 to 7 dimensions that contain that's needed, it turns out they've got exactly the same thing, Dad, including, well, slightly aligned differently, but I'll tell you, theirs is infinity, representing as 5 spiritual worlds, or what I would call dimensions. The seraphim, I think they call them, but 5 spiritual worlds that descend from this infinite, which is the creator, the creative, unified oneness itself. I say not called God. Descend through 5 worlds, and then hit a barrier that has a name. And below that is a small sort of, in relation, a very finite representation of all that's left, or all that can be represented on that other side. And that's our world. That's our reality. Just the way I'm sort of representing, in a certain way, our reality is the necessary manifestation of all that is not love, so that love might truly exist. They're representing our reality as the necessary manifestation of following the ego through its 630. So the infinite splits off into 600,000 sites, let's call them, individual consciousnesses, which take on themselves each 613 desires, and that it's all driven by desire, that our ego, we're all driven by our desire for something. And these 613 specific desires, which I've heard coordinate with the 613 laws of the Old Testament, if that's true. I haven't counted and I don't know, but that's what someone claims. Because remember, these people claim it comes from Abraham. The guy I listened to said, this is the stuff that Abraham learned. This is the real deal. This is where all our scriptures come from, according to this guy teaching us profane an introduction to the Kabbalah. And so these worlds, now we descend through our desires of being receivers. I want. I'm used to having. I'm used to getting, not giving. And so because of that, everything in my ego is colored through a prism of what do I get out of it? What does it do for me? And that's what we need to change. That's what they claim on this lowest level. Just like the Masons bring in, we're a good Christian organization that does good works. So the Kabbalists bring in, at this level of understanding the Kabbalah, as, you need to change that attribute about yourself, about understanding that your ego is all about what do I get out of it, what do I get, instead of what do I give, what do I give. See, they've never told you give to love, that Jesus, there's no Messiah mentioned, none of that, no Son of Man. It's like they don't read any of that. Where's the Lamb? Where's the temple? Where's the tabernacle? Where's Moses? None of that referred to, and yet they claim that all of that is but an extrapolation of the Kabbalah that goes back the oldest, that this was the real hidden knowledge that had to be hidden from the profane so they wouldn't kill you over it. Because this teaches you how to give instead of take. This teaches you how to get back to the spiritual, which, according to this guy, seems to lead to the same Buddhist place of not having an ego, not having a self, being one, being back in the unity of it all, right? Which nobody's ever explained to me, where does the motivation remain for what I used to call me to continue to become not me? Who is it that does the final step? What's left of me? And why do I want to do it? So it goes against this whole idea that everything's motivated by desire. Anyway, it's a very close approximation is where I left our story. It's what I want people to see that I'm learning. If I can share anything, Dad, that's most important that I've learned, it's that stop looking for Antichrist and all the demons and the dragons and the beasts of Revelation to show up as ugly, evil-looking things to what we're expecting. They're going to be the sensible-looking things. They're going to be the good guys, is what I'm starting to realize. And so when you get behind all that, they all keep pointing to this. Again, I'm still, remember, I'm trying to figure out what's more true. The world of pure materialism, where they're using a false spiritualism, just like they're using a false Christianity to divide and conquer? Or is there such a deep, dark spiritualism, like there's a deep, light, real God, we believe, right? We monotheists want to believe that the real God that we're worshiping, even if we've been led astray in all of our symbols and all of our signs and all of our, we still like to think the God that's in our heart is this God of, loving each other. How doesn't that make sense now? How else could it be assured that God could be real to us, except that in our heart we could confirm what God is, that it's that love for your neighbor, that somehow unselfish love. And this guy was teaching at the rock bottom this unselfish ego, right? In a very, it would sound a lot like something that could have been attributed to Buddha, combined with this idea that Buddha wouldn't agreed with, of these 5 spiritual worlds that lead back to a union with your creator. But a perfect union in the same sense of this pantheism. So that's why I say it sort of incorporates all of the pantheist, the dualist, and the atheist position. This can be simply a process of evolution. This can be a process of reuniting with God in the Brahminic sense of the dualist. Or this can be just the representation of God in you coming back to itself in the pantheist sense of God being in all. And that's something apparently that the Kabbalah goes on to teach. God is all in all. It's quite it's the source and origin of pantheism and dualism, which is why, and it would seem that it gives atheism its agnostic culmination or boundary, from pure atheists that know that there's nothing to the one that just presumes there's nothing that can be knowable. I think the Kabbalah is sufficient to inform all of these. And again, so I'm going back to this 7-headed dragon, the 7 spirits of God, or Revelation. How are we reconciling all that if we're going to be eschatologists and take that seriously? I feel like we fleshed out the rapture thing as a, great big false hope, just like the going to heaven, the going to Club Med in the sky. Where does it say that? Heaven's supposed to be coming to the earth. Tabernacle's coming to the earth eventually. What happens in between then? Sounds like Sheol. Sounds like Hades. Sounds like paradise. Abraham's bosom. 1,000-year millennial kingdom on earth. Another little season, devils let out on earth. Where are you going to heaven, Christians? When does that go? When's that happen? How misunderstood is all that? So against that absurdity now, these other people, whether materialists or not, I keep thinking that the materialists are being dupes. They're the patsies on the one side, because Albert Pike's letter shows that they're going to see that their atheism, their godlessness is just brutal, horror, as well as their superstitious religion. That's what's going to eventually make everybody disillusioned about the deistic people who remain, as he points out. So it's almost like you got to create these atheistic people. You got to keep fueling that fire and pointing them in that direction, and like breaking horses. You got to keep doing it. They're not just going to come out of the womb broke. And so that's what atheism is, and this preposterous explanation of coming from apes without at least, it's preposterous in the sense it's not presented in its correct proportion with the alternative stories, which have 100 to 1,000 times more evidence as far as I've seen. I mean, the evidence of aliens is stronger than the evidence of coming from apes. And all science points that way. Everything points that way. The evidence of, something like a tribe from Atlantis, these watchers that created people that knew divine secrets and shared them with mankind, who built edifices like great pyramids all over the world and such. There's a huge amount of evidence for stuff like that being the precursor to our existence, but you don't hear that talked about much. And so, I want to point out, Dad, that the stuff you don't hear talked about much, and yet that is, in some ways, impossible to hide, ultimately, like symbols on your own coats of arms and symbols on your own buildings, and, the symbols that you build, like these phallic symbols of ISIS. I mean, conspiracy theorists didn't invent that. The stories of Egypt are there. The monolithic symbol is there, and its story about being the lost phallus of Isis, of Osiris, built by Isis out of gold to replace the lost part, the 13th or 14th part, whatever it was. That's ancient stuff. Why is that so important to everybody? Why is it in the Vatican's courtyard? Why is it in America's courtyard? Why is it all over the place? Why is that important? I mean, if it wasn't, why, you're telling me everybody's taste is similar? It's like I'm always saying with these suits and ties on leaders. Go back 100 years. Look how these people dressed. That, the German czar, the Germans or the Russian czars, or the Prussians, or, even the English in their early days. And, who put suits and ties on everybody? I think that'd be a fun, if I was in college, I'd want to do my doctorate on that. Where'd these suits and ties come from? Tell me that's not tied to modern bank loans and the sign of slavery of modern time. But anyway, I say that the question for me, Dad, is still how much is the materialist, which has become the very strong vision, but maybe only to the profane. It's the profane's answer. There is no God, and that's why they're not going to feel so bad about, culling the population of the profane. But funny enough, all these people that keep pointing at the Kabbalah and have it at the center of their, or Kabbalah, pardon me, at the center of their, and the Talmud, of course, is a whole nother discussion. It's something I've been learning about a little bit, and that's a whole nother discussion. But today I just want to say how this, I'm trying to find this connection between the spiritual, how much of this is Satanism, Luciferianism, and how much of this is materialism disguised as Satanism, how much is Satanism disguised as materialism, and is there any way to know? That's what seems the more fun thing to me now. And so, some of the notes I've been making is that this whole black magic thing seems to have a lot of evidence. God accuses Solomon of building temples to Molech, and accuses his own people of sacrificing their children to Molech. So don't tell me that it's beyond discussion. Oh, they wouldn't do that anymore. Why'd they do it then? Synagogue of Satan sounds like a pretty strong accusation. Not, oh, my people that have just been misled, but a synagogue of Satan. So let's remember, too, that on the side of seeing this deeper, dark spiritual vision. And I'm really anxious to talk to our friend James, who I know understands a lot about Saturn and Saturn worship. I'm still ignorant about all that, but I find that for this reason, that in that occult worship, the dragon, the snake, it's all a sign of wisdom and truth. The light, Lucifer, that's Lucifer means light, the light bringer, the light bearer. So these are God's name for Lucifer. These are God's attributes, light bearer and music maker and morning star. So the voice of the dragon, when you think about the way Revelation presents this end times, he'll be speaking with the voice of the dragon. Christians think of that as evil. You're going to die. We're going to kill you. There's no God. We're going to, I say it's the wisdom and truth. It's the subtlety, just like in the garden. It's the same twisted story that Jesus was here to help educate us all. We're all on a path to enlightenment. We're all trying to be like Jesus, like God, right? They already in the New Age religion call it the Christ consciousness. So none of this is going to come out like Christians, at least the way I was raised. Maybe there's a Christianity which understands this differently, but the Christianity in which I was raised, the Antichrist is all against Jesus, instead of the offer of a different Jesus, someone who's not Jesus but is going to fill the role of Jesus. That's the whole point, that someone else would come along that could fill the role. Many had come and gone apparently in history, right? The arguments even made at the time with the apostles that so-and-so raised up and claimed to be something. Got a band of hundreds with him. And then he died, nothing came of it. He quotes a couple of people. So Messiah fever must have, always been around. So that when this carpenter came along, it was that much easier for the Pharisees and stuff to go, what? Are you kidding? This guy? He's healing? Well, he must be a devil. Devils heal, Haven't you ever read the Talmud? It wasn't the Talmud yet, but they had already corrupted, obviously, their Mosaic teachings into their own version. And this is what, then I guess to draw it back into where we're going today, it's presented now, I can't verify, but it's being presented as all coming from the Kabala. That the Talmud and the teachings, and that's why they don't feel that they're so subversive and evil. This is the truth. This is the light. This is the knowledge of good and evil that man ate the tree to get. That if they eat it and know good from evil, they'll be like God. And what does God say? Now we got to keep them out of the garden that they don't eat the tree of life, or they'll be like God and live forever. They'll live forever knowing good and evil. They won't. The problem is they won't be like God. Now they know good from evil. Now they know they're naked, right? They're not like God. They're not beyond whatever that is. And so, funny enough, how the Kabbalists, when you look at their central illustration that has the 10 circles, it's on what's called the tree of life. So, and it's all about the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good being to bestow, the knowledge of evil being to receive, in all of its symbolic ways. And it's this path back to being like God. And so it's all that original myth that we know is Christianity, which is why to me it helps me in believing that this is that dragon. Is child sacrifice going on as part of all of this dark side? Are those things real? That I'm not sure yet. I say that there's just a lot of, it's impossible to just close your eyes to. But how much all these, for instance, they're constantly, Prince, the rock star, was Everybody that dies, Robin Williams was an Illuminati sacrifice. Prince is an Illuminati sacrifice. Is it really like that? I mean, I'm willing to open my mind. I'm not one of those people that go, oh, it can't be, because just to be in that position, knowing that their tactics are the way they are with psychological warfare on the people, turning us into exactly what Aldous Huxley predicted in Brave New World. People that would welcome their slavery, consent to it, even love it, love their bondage, beg for it if it was threatened. So, I think to be really in the moment of history right now, to be pull yourself outside the profane and be someone of any amount of knowledge. Doesn't have to be hidden knowledge, right? You don't have to join an occult, because nowadays it seems the occult is starting to come out of the closet. At least since 95, this Kabbalistic teacher is claiming that it was made official that they could now teach Kabbalah to the profane, but certain types of Kabbalah, because the rest couldn't understand it anyway. You got to be initiated into understanding the higher ideals and understand, so what, you tell me those don't have anything to do with mysticism? That it's so secret, and how the teachings of Jesus now, if you could look at it from this perspective and say, wow, he just came claiming, look at me, I'm a nobody, we don't do anything in secret, I'm not saying anything in secret, I'm teaching the lowliest people, right? All these parables about the wedding feast and keeping the important people out in the end because they didn't think it was important to come to this feast, right? This wasn't put on by one of the insiders, right? So it's always been a world, when you look at it now, all the way from at least Egypt, where it became a world of the people who knew the priesthood, let's say, that knew the knowledge and kept it and distributed a type of knowledge to the people and kept all the secrets of magic and stuff to themselves. Otherwise, what would they have kept to themselves? What would there have been to keep secret? And how did they learn to embalm people? What was it they were keeping secret from the people? What is it anyone saw that convinced them, like I allude to the story of the staff that turns into a snake? I mean, would that convince you? You ever seen anybody do that? It sure convinced me. If I saw somebody throw down their staff and that son of a gun turned into a snake, I'd be like, wow, how'd you do that? If he said, well, you could learn how to do that. There's a way. I'd say, I want to learn, till I got to the stage where I had to sacrifice my baby to Molech. And then I'd say, ooh, shoot. But what if he showed me, but if you do that, you'll be able to do this. And he showed me something even more crazy, like levitate or strike somebody ill or foretell the future. Or, what if he really did something? Now how... I'm just saying, why were they throwing their babies to Molech? And why is that connected at all with this metaphysical understanding of the Kabbalah? And why is that the nature of this, what appears to be such a brutal, the Talmud appears to me, when we break off now into that, appears to be this beast, this dragon. That appears to be where, and it's come all the way down. They want to claim it all the way to Abraham, but this other person, as I've been reading, this Livingstone, wants to pinpoint it back in history, at least to Babylon of the 6th century BC. So either way, you've got your mystery Babylon, you've got your thing that was before. See, and it is not in John's time because that temple's been destroyed. So they can't keep their synagogue of Satan going anymore. I've been on this interpretation before, but it's making, again, more sense to me as I really look behind the curtain and see, is it some just group of rich maniacs pulling the strings, or are those rich maniacs just the people hired by these people? And then, is it any wonder they all turn out to be Jews in our modern world? Is that just to blame the Jews? Or, right? Or is that because this is bloodline stuff, and they're only giving it to people they know and that are in the accepted bloodlines? That's something to, I think, flesh out in our modern world, because even a Christian preacher like Tex Mars, who I was surprised to find this, I was surprised to see he was a Christian preacher from, well, at least, I don't know if he's still out there, but I watched something from 20 years ago, Dad, in which he was bringing up, he was trying to make this connection to the Illuminati and secret societies, like the Masons and such, and Luciferianism, but then he goes off on a tangent where he's basically anti, Zionist position, or at least pointing out that all the people that run our government are, either Jews or, they're basically all Jews, and they all work for it. They show that they're unbiased loyalty to Israel first, even over America. And, that's been shown so many times that that's undeniable. It's obvious that, but could that explain the bigger story for those of us who are studying it? Does that really mean America's working for Israel? That the way he tried to present it is, in essence, is their lobby over our Congress controls our military? See, that seems a pretty thin thread to me. We don't let the money from China, control us, right? We just put China in deeper debt. We don't let the money from the Saudis control us. We just keep telling them what to do. Sell your oil dirt cheap. But they're trying to present that this tiny little country of Israel keeps us, through their lobbying money and influence, our guns pointed at their enemies. And I say that's a pretty thin thread. I would say that it's much easier to follow a thread that shows all of the Middle East having been set up for 100 years through these British agencies and then carried on through the CIA, all these secret societies that amount to the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ayatollah, the first Ayatollah Khomeini was that overthrew the Shah of Iran. Total CIA plant. I mean, that's so obvious now to me, seeing so you got to read back to that. See, what have I been saying instinctively, Dad, watching the news? Iran, strings are pulled. I've been saying Russia's strings are pulled. What are they teaching me? Well, Russia's been run by these same Jews that are running America. And now what are they saying in this article that I started with? That as much as the Soviet Union, that they're the ones that came and fought the Arabs in the 1948 war to set up Israel. And then following 67, when everybody drew up new allies, Israel went with the West. Russia didn't become, hostile toward Israel, but in fact have kept friendly relations, even while the people that, Syria and the other people that Russia support are, the most hostile enemies of Israel. That's got to be somewhat accounted for in the scheme of things, and it makes sense if they're all the same people, Israel, America, Russia. They're all these Jews, and what is, quite clear, or what's becoming clear through the Talmudic understanding, is what do these Jews want to do? Kill Christians, these sons of guns that are threatening to take over their way of life through rebuilding the temple, right? By claiming when the Messiah comes that he comes for them. You see why they hate the Christians and why this Judeo-Christian thing, they're using the Christians as the foot soldiers and as the masses of profane, ignorant population to support their wars, to be the soldiers, to use all their money and industry to build their weapons and support their soldiers. Because, of course, the Christian voting bloc is the biggest. And that's why you don't have a Jewish president. You just have all the Jews behind him, paying him the money and running the show and doing all the dirty stuff that it appears these people have to do. That's where this whole blood sacrifice and stuff comes in. I mean, I'm not going to talk about it today because I don't have all my facts. I just have all this stuff floating in my head from, having come across it all and being so aware of how it really works for them, or how it's purported to, or what this Talmud says about Christians and about the sacrifice of the blood of Christians and the position of Christians and the need to wipe them out, and therefore the justification in some of the means of wiping them out and sacrificing their blood. Really heavy, right? And so how much of this connects to the Kabbalah, I'm not sure. Was the Kabbalah corrupted into being the source, the metaphysical source of these other darker expressions? Which spawned which, or which is borrowing from which? I think it's much more that's the truth, you guys. It's not one big conspiracy of all these things mixed together like a hodgepodge. Different people do things for different reasons that are very important to them. On a elite level, they would seem to think they know something. The secret, there seems to be, only a couple of them that are valuable enough. The secret seems to be that morality doesn't matter, that this life is an illusion, and therefore you don't have to be moral, but you can't tell the population that, or everything's anarchy. But you that are the initiated, that are the elite, you are, as Nietzsche said, beyond good and evil. And that is the step into a spiritual realm of existence. Because you demonstrate that you are beyond this attachment to being good or being bad. This white and black yin-yang experience, which of a necessity must exist to contain this test, this environment that is here to push the enlightened man, the superman, as Nietzsche anticipated him, beyond good and evil and into the spiritual connection of reality, which I'm switching back to the Kabbalistic version that I'm learning versus the materialist Nietzscheite version of just being the natural evolution. But either way, you see that it's the same moment. And I can see that in this version of dark magic and blood sacrifice, that demonstrating that is through, sacrificing babies, your own baby, your own children, your own whatever, killing people, sacrificing blood. This is what, and then I say, if that's true, you better show me some sign that I've seen the other side of the spiritual side, or I'm not going to keep sacrificing blood. But if you do show me, if all of a sudden I do that and I levitate, I can fly around the room for a few minutes, and you tell me, the more blood you sacrifice, the more power you're going to get, I might just keep sacrificing blood. I mean, I can see how then you could have a cult that did that. But until then, and an initiation process where you couldn't just show everybody, and a plan to sacrifice everybody's blood at some point to get ultimate power in the world. I'm just saying that on the dark side, that's where it appears to come from. On the materialist side of a bunch of bankers being in charge, I mean, most of the liberals have fleshed that out as these guys using their secret societies to, get order out of chaos. Create war, create war, create war. And so I say that if I'm going to bet on a spiritual darkness that is in some sort of warfare with spiritual light, and that is the nature of what we see in the world of light and darkness, meaning good and evil in our material world, then I'm going to say that because of that stated hierarchy, then there's a spiritual darkness which empowers this material forces like the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds with banking power. And these people might very well be accused of being Satanists when the truth is they're die-in-the-wool materialists. They believe in eugenics and Darwinian superiority of their race. They believe perhaps in the bloodlines that they've come from that makes them superior to rule, and a real fear that the general population, if they overran them, could intermix with those bloodlines and destroy everything, send us back to the dark ages of man with no knowledge. I mean, that's the way the material version, and the more I hear that, the more that looks like what really is in play in the material world. And so that's where our news really comes from. And in that world, like I say, but the string pullers we're still finding may in fact be in a darker spiritual world where they've got a different idea. And that, we'd expect to be some sort of Luciferian or satanic opposition to God's idea of a tabernacle, that he'll be their very God and they'll be his very people. That's what it said. And so, that's got to be the objection. How do you keep that tabernacle from coming here? If God don't have any very people, I suppose. And so if that's the spiritual battle going on that's empowering these people of the material world, and that's why they keep sacrificing the blood when they're told to, because they've seen where their power comes from. That's the part of the question, I guess, Dad, I'm not ready to answer yet, but it seems reasonable. If I was like they do in a court, I've seen sufficient evidence to let it go to trial. It's not absurd. Like, for instance, the UFO thing, no, I would throw it out of court at this point. I've seen sufficient evidence to see that, if anything, the trial should be on these same people and what they're doing with Tesla technology since they stole it. All this technology that controls the weather, that can make earthquakes, this technology that can make plasma balls and all the things, the CERN, all the technology we know that they're using, let alone the one we don't. I'd rather see an investigation into that than pretend that what we're looking for is to, little green men or some other kind of intelligence from some other part of the universe coming in their spaceships. In fact, we might even know that that's impossible. There seems to be some evidence that we know that you can't even fly to the moon because of the magnetic or otherwise shields that make gravity what it is. And that would explain, of course, why we've never been back in 60 years. This race to the 50 years later, nobody cares, to go back. Nobody, it's just kind of interesting. They tease us with the idea of being shot into space and all this things, right, taking people to outer space. But we've been to the moon, we landed on the moon, and say, okay, been there, done that. And now the technologies parallel to that expand at a rate that we can shoot rockets, we read last week in the news, 4,000 to 7,000 miles an hour. We have weapons that'll go that fast. We have, as I say, these technologies, space weapons, let's say, things that whatever dustified the twin towers. We have all this kind of stuff that's gone parallel. You mean we don't have parallel technology for being able to show what we can do with getting to the moon now and just flying up there to get some more moon rocks just for fun, just to take a few rich people to fund some let's feed the poor people by taking some rich people to the moon? So anyway, it's odd. It's at least odd to me in that investigation. So I'm not totally throwing that one out of court, but the UFO one seems, there's just nothing left of that. Everything's been explained that I've seen, except hype and propaganda from the very people you'd expect to get it from, that started it with War of the Worlds in the first place, just to see how much hype and propaganda, how far does the idea of space aliens go? Will people just laugh it off and make it like a child's book that no one would take seriously? No, as a matter of fact, they found that people would take it quite seriously. So anyway, in this Huffington Post thing, we see that we're told that Russia and, well, I think this is kind of important to our watch for the Third World War. So I'm going to read the next two paragraphs. I opened with this paragraph that ends with, yet despite their history of having been on opposite sides for much of the Cold War, since the Soviet Union collapsed, the Russian Federation has pursued an increasingly pragmatic foreign policy with Israel. As Russia reasserts a robust footprint in the tumultuous Middle East, the state of Russia-Israeli relations is naturally complicated. But it is arguably true that the bilateral relationship has never been stronger. In 2005, Russian President Vladimir Putin was the first Russian leader to visit Israel. Putin has since referred to Israel as a special state to Russia, based on their shared interests and long collaborative history. I wonder what that is, except that they're both populated by the same Khazarian Jews. The foundation the two nations have established is being tested as their positions on Iran and Syria weigh heavily on their ability to move forward collaboratively. Russia's growing coordination with Iran and Hezbollah on the Syrian battlefield has made more complicated Israel's views of Putin's agenda in the Middle East. Although an important player in the P5+1 nuclear negotiations with Iran, Russia is also now in the process of providing S-300 anti-aircraft missiles to Tehran. Russia and Iran's common cause in the Levant is increasingly at odds with Israel's stance on numerous issues. While Moscow and Tel Aviv remain committed to their cordial relationship, they are also finding it increasingly difficult to justify prioritizing that relationship at the expense of their grander regional strategic objectives. So does anyone read more, wedges being put in? And if not wedges, they can claim all the love they want. They're sending anti-aircraft missiles to Tehran. So that drastically reduces Israel's capabilities with Tehran, which you read in the next paragraph. Russia's support of President Bashar al-Assad is not necessarily an issue for Israel. The Israeli government appear to prefer that Assad's regime survives given the risk of Islamist extremists seizing control of Damascus and/or large swaths of territory near Israel in the Golan Heights. What is potentially a real problem for Israel, however, is the S-400 anti-aircraft missiles that Russia has sent to Syria. If these were either successfully provided to Hezbollah for its use, or if Russia were for some reason choose to use them against the Israeli Air Force, Israel's strategic advantage against Hezbollah would be severely compromised. So, again, are these pointing toward ultimate peace or ultimate war in the region? When we bring it into our view that we're always looking at on Sunday, I'm saying that it's becoming a little easier for me, Dad, to break it into like a book, 3 parts. You got your beginning, which seems to go back all the way to the dragon of, Revelation, perhaps to Nimrod, the mighty hunter in Babylon, certainly in some manner to the Babylon of the 6th century BC with the Kabala, coming out of his people, God's people. The Kabbalah didn't come out of, it's all Jews. The priests of the Kabbalah nowadays are all Jews except for very few exceptions, these people that have to be initiated to be priests of the Kabbalah. We know the Talmud is all the Jews, of course, but the Kabbalah came from God's people. So this is why, think of your serpents, your demons, and your beasts of Revelation. I think this is where it's going to lead. 600 BC. God's people come up with the Kabbalah. God's people sacrifice their children to Molech. God's people build long before that, build the golden calf right out of Egypt. God's people betray him with their sacrifices in the temple. right off the bat. So, I think this is the beginning of the story. And then the middle of the story has us, the Messiah coming and this whole happening in history that results in, very much like the original happening, a small portion of the people keeping the truth and the rest of it being overwhelmed by what was either already there or what sought to destroy it from the start. In the beginning, it was all the Jews, which, by some people's account, they're what seek to destroy it all along, right? They're the ones that went up to Russia, or at least I shouldn't say all along, in this modern world to set up for the coming of the third temple. And that's why I say, are they not being sent them by someone? Are they not being set up? Does it not say that their city is destroyed? Are they seeking to destroy their city and turn it into a desolation? I doubt it. This Zionist movement, these people that we're claiming are running Russia and running America, see, aren't they maybe being set up as one of the pawns in the game? That's what I think is important for me right now, that I'm looking at trying to make sense of the history that's going on in this day. But that centerpiece of history, to me, is becoming more clearly a purposeful destruction of the truth, just like it was through this Kabala being a destruction of the truth that Moses and set up through the tabernacle that was meant to be carried on through the actual priests of God. You can't say that it was when God was accusing them from way back then, and then accuses them of sacrificing their children to Moloch, accuses Solomon of going off and in the end with his wives and betraying, God, fornicating with all these other gods. So there's plenty of biblical foundation to establish in our eschatology that it's quite simple to think that by the time the Messiah comes along, all these forces are already established against the very one Jesus spoke of, the Talmudic tradition that literally killed him and then set out to destroy this church. And for the most part did, it would seem. I'm starting to see that in that picture, Dad, it helped it become part of this Roman Catholic tradition. It probably is the one that pushed for taking all the Jewish elements out. These aren't Jews. They got nothing to do with Jews. They're pagans. I don't know. Paganizing that tradition. All this becomes the interesting history for me now to study. And these whole Gnostic Christians that run off into the hills to go start their religions in secret, and are persecuted by the church. And very interesting, to find that these Gnostic Christians that run off into the hills, the basis of their Christianity usually all has to do with the, poverty, chastity, but their sin seems to have to do with denying that the physical life is good, but seeing it as an evil world that they've got to keep themselves from. Well, it's not hard to get that sort of aesthetic from the Christian teaching, isn't it? That's what Buddha came up with on the other side. Any way you approach it, as a person looking for the good, the right, the spiritual truth that isn't just all about the ego and about desire, as the Kabbalists put it. Aren't you going to find that it's selflessness, it's trying to satisfy my fleeting desires that is the problem, and that if there's a spirit world, it must be one in which it's the other side of this world of desire worship. And so wouldn't you think then that the way to God or the way to the spiritual life is in the denying of the worship of this life in as many ways as it was possible? So the whole aesthetic sort of monk and aesthetic movements seemed to me quite naturally, the people that were at least led, if they were led astray into some other doctrines, these dualistic doctrines or whatever, I mean, they're led astray through a type of behavior that seems to be quite pure. You know, as I say, I don't know the evidence that what they were led astray to is now to go sacrifice children. I mean, come on, these all seem to come from these doctrines of sex, you know, these progenitor kind of gods and rituals, where it's all about procreating the gods, procreating the line of the god, recreating through the human orgy the spirit of the god and all that. All these sex orgies and stuff. You don't find that in Gnostic Christianity at least I haven't yet. And so I'm just wondering, these people were driven into small clans and lived a life that sounds more like the first church. And much of it today is, I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I should stop talking about it. My point being that this whole middle age of the story, I think, is one that we have to see completely colored by the early part, the beginning of the story. The whole middle age of the story, and everywhere, the Aztecs and the Mayans, and everybody's been colored now with what went on in that first age of the story. And that's easy to see by the way all the religions pop up all over the world and have all this similarity. And so I think it's important. And then you have this end of the story. And the end is where we're at, and why it seems, or it feels like where we're at, feels like what they all prophesied about. Everybody seems to know it's the end on almost all levels of interest in this time or in this subject. It seems to have the indicators from everybody's position, everybody's eschatology or theory. And so, age of Aquarius, it's a new beginning in consciousness. It's the planetary alignments seem to be such. People are expecting these, Nibiru and all different sort of planetary things to go on that seem in alignment. Scriptures of every kind seem to be coming together, prophecies. And so it's a time that we get to look at with the beginning and middle already in their place. And what I say the problem with that is we've inherited an end that's already been told to us, and the reasons and everything are already, and that's the part we have to start unraveling, is looking back as far as we can on the beginning and getting a context so that the middle can be seen for, pardon me, what it is and where the deceptions might occur, where the baby is and where the bathwater is, so that everything doesn't just get thrown out. There must be a lot of truth. There's a lot of truth in the Kabbalah, obviously. Otherwise, how could it be this divine truth that's claimed to go back to perhaps the ancestors of the Atlantis, the lost nation of Atlantis? And there's a lot of that legend in their history, as I'm seeing it. And so must contain something convincing. Can't just be all a stage show. But in our time, at the end of the story, my goodness, we're all the way up to where they've created the technologies to have deception going on all the time. Bread and circus, constant presentation, as I'm always saying, of like a masquerade. You're drawn into something that looks, and it's a continuance. It keeps going. The masquerade isn't just for the night. It's not just a party. It's an ongoing masquerade. North Korea, Russia, Israel, Syria, Iran, the Palestinians. Whatever happened to Yasser Arafat's great stand? How'd that just fizzle off into this giant war in the region, and we don't hear about the Palestinians anymore? And that's just a side issue all of a sudden. Well, you look back in history, who was he working for? Who'd he come up through? These same organizations, right? He's just another person working their angle toward what? This is the big thing I want to end on today. Toward what? And if I have just a few minutes, I think I want to end it with the first paragraph out of this other guy's book. At least I think it is. What I've been trying to do, Dad, is I've been reading through this guy Livingstone's book again, because I find a lot of good information mixed with stuff that seems to me to be either superfluous information that takes a lot of time to read because he's got a lot of genealogies that's important to him, or information that's twisted in a way that presents the facts as pointing toward someone else's conclusion, like Paul being an Illuminatist, or Christianity being a complete misunderstanding, where I'm trying to point the same historical information to demonstrate that I don't care about the argument at the moment about whether you think Christianity is a total perversion or just partly perverted. I'm trying to use the history to show who's been perverting it and how. And so I've been trying to go through his book to take out the parts in which he's presenting his conclusions and get to the stuff where he's grabbing at his facts and saving those over somewhere else so that I can look at them in a different light. And so in the way that we're always looking at what's going on in the world right now in the news and who's behind it and all this, I want to read this first, couple paragraphs that I gleaned from, I think they're the first part of his book, Terrorism and the Illuminati by, I can't remember his first name right now, it's not in front of me, Livingstone. I know Livingstone is his last name. So this is a quote. Islam does not pose a threat to the West. It is the contrary that is correct. Islamic terrorist organizations are hotbeds of imposters in service of the West. It is well known that there are various dubious relationships that exist between Islamic radicals and Western powers. The truth is far more sinister. Islamic terrorists are connected with Western power through an intricate network of secret societies. While outwardly claiming to adhere to disparate religions, the Islamic terrorists follow a heretical version of the faith, ultimately rooted, like their counterparts in the West, in the same occult doctrine, the worship of Lucifer, and the belief in the use of religion as a disguise to deceive the masses. The, quote, Illuminati really is merely a convenient term to refer to those individuals and secret organizations who continue to pursue the same goals in our time. In actuality, the order's existence began long before the 18th century. The truth is it began in Babylon in the 6th century BC with the advent of the Jewish heresy of the Kabala. According to their own accounts, though, the Illuminati represents the descendants of the fallen angels who inhabited the lost continent of Atlantis. These fallen angels interbred with humans to whom they taught the ancient wisdom. Therefore, throughout the centuries, the Illuminati have been carefully intermarrying with each other to preserve their sacred bloodline, handing on their esoteric knowledge from generation to generation. For this reason, they also refer to themselves as the family. So, Dad, I want to end today by pointing out that, this is his summation of things going from today's terrorism, not at all having anything to do with Islamic radicalism, except that Islamic radicalism is, in fact, an imposter, purposely funded and presented as such through Western powers. And his book, I think, presents a pretty clear trail of that by the actual people that have headed in these organizations and what they've been busy doing and who they've been busy hanging with, meaning mostly Western powers. But where he now asserts the Illuminati's role, the Kabbalah's instigation, coming from fallen angels, all of these things is where I'm wondering how much of that now is the deception to keep everybody from simply, peeling back the obvious layers of the onion to get to these I'm not sure what to call them, this small group of people that are bringing about war on purpose to have control of the world. I don't know who they're doing it for. Are they doing it for Lucifer? Do they think they come from fallen angels? Because that would be easy to, to find in your fictionalized story, right? For these bunch of Christians and deistic people who believe in a real God and believe these scriptures, and you're laughing at them, and you want to set them up for the future. So, why not grab from their stories? The Kabala, which is a version of their old, Jewish mysticism, let's say. Who claims fallen angels? All of them? Is that common knowledge? Is that what they all get initiated into? Or is that at the highest levels, or is that even true? Is that something that, at the highest levels you're told that that's something we laugh about? See, I say it's all being, orchestrated, and these things that are so popular come to me as being most suspect. And yet, it seems, it seems irresponsible at this point, Dad, to imagine that there is no such dark force. It's spoken of in our scriptures, this whole devil, this spiritual battle, this final this final putting away of these evil spirits into a dark place that sin won't have, temptation won't have access to man for some 1,000 years. All this points to something going on in what we might call in the air, outside of the purely material aspect of life. And then when you have such things as accusations of the people right outside of their covenant with Moses sacrificing to Molech, and Solomon himself building altars to these people like Molech, who we know have been accused of sacrificing children, and that all points to something deeper and darker. And if that was going on, when did that stop? Where'd that power go? Why do we think it stopped? Why are we, right? And so that's what I'm kind of on right now, trying to figure out how much of it is real and how much of it is all part of the deception and keeping us on track, so that ultimately I think, what we've learned from Daniel and Revelation and our watch of the end of time, even as we correct it for things like a rapture, even if we correct it 20 times for ideas of Antichrist or false deliverer, synagogue of Satan, and all these ideas that we feel we have a hold on, I believe we're going to start going over the book of Daniel again. We still have a pretty good grip on an eschatological view. Nostradamus seems to, as just, let's say, an outside source, gives us support. The book of Enoch, as a source not canonized, gives us some support. The Quran, the way I've learned them from Sheikh Imran Hossein, the Quran offers support to our eschatological vision of an Armageddon, of a second coming, and all these things I don't think are in doubt in my mind. It's what's in doubt is the way that I've been sold the general vision, and how much of it has the truth and how much of it is full of the masquerade, so that I might be informed and know when the day of the Lord is at hand, because that's what seems to be important. I just want to, the very elect are going to be fooled if that were possible. So I feel like that's not possible with us, because we're watching closely. Our minds are open. We're ready to see that 7-year covenant. If that's not because of the Jordanian king, the Hashemite king, granting the right to for the Jews to build their temple next to the Dome of the Rock on the mount, well then, then I'm going to be very surprised to see a different 7-year covenant that satisfies all those things. And coming from someone who isn't a Jew, that couldn't possibly be called the Messiah, or right? 2 witnesses don't show up to denounce the rebuilding of the temple, or the temple isn't announced in this 7-year covenant to be rebuilt, I'm going to be surprised, because we've been pulling a lot of strings together with regard to the scriptural relevance of these things. And I don't think we have to question the foundation of what we're watching. I think what we're doing, or what I'm doing in my own heart, is I'm seeing the real depth, that what I'm watching has been shrouded in smoke and deception and masquerade and color. But the substance is all still there. They can't hide the substance. And therefore, the more digging I do, the clearer that substance becomes. And I hope that's the way, it's becoming clearer for people. And, I know the views of this new production aren't as high as the old ones, but hopefully more people are getting something out of it and watching it. And thanks for being here. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for having me on the show, Dad. I'll see you next week.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right. And it was another superb analysis of this week's happenings in the news in the Middle East. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube, or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube, and comment. Drop us a line. Subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.